Next, we're going to discuss Freud's psychosexual stages. Now, it's important to note that these are childhood stages of development according to Freud. This would be technically developmental psych, but because it's not scientifically valid, we're just going to chalk it up to Freud or fraud, whatever you want to call it. Now, we're not going to spend a great amount of detail in this video because we're going to talk about this more in class. But what this is all about is how experiences throughout our childhood can shape and direct our personality development. All right, so Freud, with these psychosexual stages, you want to think about fixation. According to Freud, if you experience a really traumatic event during one of these stages, then you can become fixated in these stages. So, for example, from 0 to 18 months of age, most children are in what Freud calls the oral stage. Why? Because the pleasure center is in the mouth. It's oral. Why? Because babies are sucking on bottles, sucking on their thumbs, chewing. They're always putting things in their mouth. Okay, as you saw from videos of my son, Emerson, this is true. However, according to Freud, if your mother drops you during this stage, that could be such a traumatic experience that you'll become fixated in this stage. And so as an adult, you might be addicted to chewing gum or chewing on sunflower seeds, or you might be a chain smoker because you constantly have to have that oral stimulation. All right. The next phase is the anal stage, and then the phallic stage, then the latency stage, and then the genital stage. I'm going to go ahead and pass on talking about this in the video, and we'll focus more on this in class. But remember, the big key thing about the psychosexual stages is that Freud believed that if we don't get fixated or stuck in one of these stages, then we're going to grow up into be a well-adjusted individuals. However, if we are fixated in one of those stages, then we're going to grow up, we're not going to fully develop into well-adjusted individuals, and we might suffer from neurosis or some kind of psychotic disorder. We're going to go ahead and skip these concepts too, and we're going to focus on these more in class. But if you'd like to pause the video to take notes over them, that would be fine as well. Now, as you may have picked up by now, considering everything we've talked about with Freud, Freud was a very controversial figure, and many of his colleagues broke away from his view, but still maintain a psychodynamic aspect to their theories. For example, Alfred Adler didn't emphasize really unconscious sex drives as he did the importance of childhood social tensions. Karen Horney sought to balance Freud's masculine biases. She thought that Freud's hypothesis that women were naturally subservient and dependent on men was false, so she broke away from Freud in that sense. Carl Jung emphasized the collective unconscious, a concept of shared inherited reservoir of memory traces from our species' history. So in more detail, Jung, originally a close friend and follower of Freud, disagreed with Freud's emphasis on the sex drive. Jung believed the collective unconscious and not sex to be the basic force in the development of personality. The collective unconscious, according to Jung, consists of ancient memory traces and symbols that are passed on by birth and are shared by all peoples and all cultures. One of the best examples of the collective unconscious, according to Jung, is religion, or the idea of a higher being or God. Okay, this symbol, also known as an archetype, as Jung called them, is found in almost all cultures around the world. If you go to India or China, or Russia, or Europe, or Africa, or the United States, you will find some type of deity or some type of religious symbol. This is what this is what Jung is talking about with the collective unconscious and their archetypes. Alfred Adler, like Jung, was originally a friend and follower of Freud, but he disagreed with his theory that humans are governed by biological and sexual urges. Adler believed that the main factors influencing a child's development were sibling influences and child-rearing practices. Adler proposed that humans are motivated by social urges, and that each person is a social being with a unique personality. In contrast to Freud's emphasis on unconscious forces that influence our behaviors, Adler suggested that we are aware of our own motives and goals and have the capacity to guide and plan our own futures. Karen Horney, never a follower of Freud, strongly objected to his view that women were dependent, vain, and submissive because of biological forces and childhood sexual experiences. She especially took issue with Freud's idea that penis envy affected girls' development. Horney insisted that the major influence on personality development can be found in child-parent social interaction. Next, we're going to talk about assessing the unconscious. Now, when it comes to assessing the unconscious, we're going to be talking about tests called projective tests. Projective tests is a personality test, such as the Rorschach or the TAT, that provides ambiguous stimuli designed to trigger projection of one's inner dynamics. Two examples of projective tests are the Thematic Apperception test, known as the TAT, and the Rorschach ink blot test. Their answers reveal the manifest content, and they can be discovered, or they can be used to discover or interpret the latent content of your unconscious mind. So, for example, let's start first with the Thematic Apperception test. The Thematic Apperception test, or the TAT, is a projective test in which people express their inner feelings and interest through the stories they make up about ambiguous scenes. So, for example, if Ricardo sees this image, he might see it as the man has just passed away and his wife, the woman, is mourning in the hallway. Or Billy might see this image and say, well, the man got home late one night inebriated and started being very violent towards his wife, and his wife is now weeping in the hallway after the man passed out. So you can have different interpretations, and the interpretations of these images can be analyzed to discover your underlying subconscious personality. So what do you see when you see this image? We'll talk about it in class. The other type of projective test is called the Rorschach Test. You might remember the name Rorschach if you ever watched the movie Watchmen. He was one of the main characters. But anyway, the Rorschach Test seeks to identify people's inner feelings by analyzing their interpretations of ink blots, as we see here. So one of you might see this and say, oh, it's a skeleton, it looks like a skull, a man's face. But to be honest, when I look at it, I see a pelvic bone. What do you see when you see this one? So what kind of test is this? Is this a Rorschach or is this a Thematic Apperception test? That's right. It's a TAT. It's a Thematic Apperception because he's given some kind of image to make up a story. So what kind of test is this? That's right. It's the Rorschach ink blot test. Very good. Now, that concludes Unit 13.1, Psychoanalytic Perspective of Personality. We'll see you guys for the next one.